talk of give and take, what should be and what should not, while these dead men are loitering here, to stir the boiling pot. You say we should still the land till Germany is overcome, but who is there to argue that? No Pierce is deaf and dumb, and is there logic to outweigh MacDonough's bony tongue? How could you dream they'd listen? They have an ear alone for those new comrades they have found. Lord Edward and Wolfe Tone are meddled without give and take, that converse bone to bone. And maybe an epitaph of the 1968 men by someone very different. One of the war poets, Edward Thomas. The cherry trees bend over and are shedding on the old road where all that passed are dead, their petals strewing the grass as for a wedding, this early May morn, where there is none to wed. And you're going Grail Beather, trodden of Bala Clee by Pádraig O Conchubhair, sat up the killer, and quiven the files a shire in a casca, a trodden of Bala Clee, is entitled to the hine of the lies for nada, a trodden of Bala Clee. Near about a race a scam for air, Bian Falligear is some pillar and deal, is slahan a fena, it's an ale and a lee, a trodden of Bala Clee. The Cunnick of a oglig lot in the Searsha, a trodden of Bala Clee, agus born a hoiga, is some broad in the breha, a trodden of Bala Clee, a gab a blesken and air and gold, a keg brachan lay, Bian tead go chown, agus leban verdig regi bowl. That's right, Bala Clee. News of the rising of 1916 reverberated like a thunderclap all over the hills and mountains and valleys of Ireland. In regions as remote as Letterlee, there were conflicting rumours. Some said the whole country had risen, others that the revolt was crushed after a few hours. Even within a short distance of Dublin, it was impossible to get a clear picture. A group of Maynooth students had gone for a walk through the countryside on Easter Monday, and they met a passing motorcyclist who told them that the GPO and many other vantage points in Dublin had been seized by the rebels. Every night of that fateful week, Marty and his friends went up to the high field, where they could see the flames, the glow of the fires raging from the Dublin flames. Their hearts were saddened by the boom of the great guns pouring shells into the centre of the city. Many of the students had seen Donald Buckley and his contingent from Maynooth kneel bareheaded before the president of the college, asking his blessing as they made their way to Dublin. And Lord Nagale will give a small prize to anyone that can identify that quotation and its connection with the poem in Irish before it. But anyway, men of Kildare. I rushed down to O'Buckley's shop, which was shuttered and closed. Shutters were down. I found Donald busily engaged in filling school satchels with buckshot, and the panels were down from the walls, and the pikes and guns were ready for issue. Most of our company lived in the village. No, Maynooth was only a village, that's it. Most of our company lived in the village, and I mobilised them all except Pádraig Kerwin. I decided not to mobilise Kerwin. He was a married man with 5 small children, and without his wages they would have nothing to live on. I had just returned to the shop when there was a tremendous battering on the door. They thought it was the police. I opened it, however, and I found Kerwin there in a towering rage. I tried to reason with him, but to no avail. I remember he said, I have lived to fight for Ireland, and during that week in Dublin he proved his worth. He was followed to the door by Pádraig Weaver. Pádraig Weaver was the captain of the National Volunteers in Maynooth. Now the National Volunteers were the volunteers that followed John Redmond. I hear he said that the fight had started in Dublin, and I brought my own rifle. He fell in with the other 12 men in O'Buckley's yard, and I'll give you their names. There was Liam Regan and Jack Graves that worked in O'Buckley's shop, Tom Burton, who was a veteran of the Boer War, Ted Kelly, a medical student in UCD, Tom Harris, who was barely 16 years of age, Pádraig Colgan, Pat Kerwin, Tom Mangan, Joel Edwidge, Tim Terrell, Matthew and Jack Maguire, and Pádraig Weaver. O'Buckley's father had died in 1915, and he was leaving his wife Sinead and 7 children. After 2 years spent panelling the walls, they put up the panels to hide the guns, behind the panels. After 2 years spent panelling the walls and watching them drilling in the mill yard, she knew well that that day was to come. It didn't make the parting any easier. As they marched down the street of Maynooth, they were met by 2 RIC men, Sergeant Nolan and Sergeant Cleary and Constable Nolan. These were unarmed, but Ted Kelly drew his revolver and said to them if they tried to stop the volunteers, they must take the consequences. And they took discretion to be the better part of valour, and they went back to the barracks. They entered the college grounds, and they were met by the president of the college, Monsignor Morgan. He appealed to them to return home before they'd be slaughtered. "You're fools," he said. They'd be killed. "You're fools," he said, "and you're going to be slaughtered." But when his plea fell on deaf ears, he changed his tune. "Kneel down," he said. "If ye kneel down, I'll give you my blessing." And he did. They marched on through Clonsilla and Blanchardstown, and the old soldier Budden then made them take to the fields and travel in silence. Matt Maguire was sent ahead to scout. Now Matt Maguire was light, L-I-G-H-T and L-I-T-H-E, and that's why they sent him ahead. And he was armed with a pike of all things, a crappie pike, 98 pike. He cleared the wall armed with his pike, and there was an almighty crash, and we suddenly thought we were being attacked by the whole British army. It turned out he had jumped into a huge heap of tin cans, which were being stored there by the Ashtown racecourse. That's the racecourse that just been the Phoenix Park. When they reached Glasnevin, they found what they thought was an empty vault, and with some trepidation they took shelter there till morning. And when morning came, much to their relief, it turned out it wasn't a vault, it was an empty water cistern. Budden continued to the GPO to get orders without any trouble, and when he was on his way back, he detoured to his lodging to put on his captain's uniform, only to find that his landlady, Mrs. Shea, had burnt it the minute she heard about the rebellion. He was taking no chances. At Doyle's Corner, he met O'Buchala and the men marching on to Dublin. They had been driven out of Glasnevin by the arrival of the gravediggers, not literally, but when the gravediggers came, they thought it better to move. And they also thought that Budden might have been shot. Mac Maguire was sent ahead to scout again, this time without his pike. And suddenly he came flying around the corner. The volunteers moved to the side of the streets immediately and fell on their knees, levelling their guns and charging their pikes. "It's all right," said Maguire. "It's all right," he said. "When I went round the corner, the first man I saw was my boss, William Chamberlain. And how was I to explain to him that I was going out to fight for Ireland instead of exercising his horses where I should be, below on Crow Hill in Maynooth, Antrim parents. He was brought up as a member of the Church of Ireland and coached the British Foreign Service of the Sporshire Tended, Sir Roger Casement, because of the work he did in the Congo in Africa and in the Amazon Basin in South America. He said, the natives were terrorised, the chiefs and the elders killed, if rubber, ivory and food were not produced in sufficient quantity. The workers were maimed and mutilated. Hostages were taken, workmen were chained, those who were too old to work were killed, and the younger men and women were flogged with rawhide whips, which made flakes of their skin and flesh fly as they whistled through the air. He retired from the Foreign Service in 1914, Hanish Herden, learned Irish, joined the volunteers, and as we know he was sent to negotiate with the German government, and that was the 20,000 rifles that were to be landed at Enid. At the same time, Captain Robert Monteith, who was a volunteer organiser, and Casement and his backman Bailey were to come to Ireland on a German submarine. And Monteith writes, "We sighted the Arm ship before dark, but there was no sign of the pilot boat which was to guide her into Phoenix. We cruised on the surface for 2 hours looking for the signal, 2 green lights, but we could not imagine what had happened. And the submarine captain said he could wait no longer, and he headed for the shore. We went below, sick at heart. What could have gone wrong? Cadaharla, and of course everything had gone wrong. For the Kerry volunteers had not expected the ship to come till Easter Sunday. This was Good Friday. The pilot had seen the ship, but he didn't think it was that ship because it was 2 days too early. And of course, as you know, the volunteers led by Con Keating that were to capture the Trellev radio, the radio equipment in the radio college in Waterville, They had taken a wrong turning in their nighttime journey and driven off the pier in Ballykisan, with their deaths off the pier in Ballykisan. And Monteith continues, we got out pistols, and I loaded mine. I said to Casement, do you know how to load this model? And he said, I've never loaded one, I never carried a pistol in my life. And Monteith said, what about the Congo and the Amazon? And Casement said, the only weapon I ever had was my walking stick. A small rubber boat was lifted out through the forward hatch. We put on our life belts and got in. The boat was short and wide and broad and designed for use with a motor, but the captain would not give us the engine. The Coast Guard would hear, he said, and you would be captured immediately. And with Dimmigan over on, the submarine vanished. And it came to me, he says, I was being forced to a ferry casement. Weak and ill as he was after being confined for so long in the submarine, to certain death. And just at that moment, a huge wave rose from behind us and the boat upset and flung us into the water. The lifebelts brought us to the surface. The boat righted itself and we dragged it ashore. I tried to rupture the boat with my dagger, but I was too weak and I joined the others where they lay on the beach. And when the casement exhibition opens in the museum in Tralee at the end of next month or whenever, you'll be able to see that very dagger that Monteith had that he tried to cut the rubber boat with. It paid us well to keep in with Scotland Yard. On account of there was an exhibition in the museum on William Melville, the British spymaster, which aroused a bit of controversy at the time. But it paid us well to keep in with Scotland Yard because they are sending stuff over now for this exhibition that has never been seen since 1916. And among the exhibits will be the very dagger that Monteith tried to rupture the boat with. He actually the double barrel name, I think he was Hugh O'Hagan Hill or something like that. Anyway, he said he'd been 35 and a half years in the force and had spent 3 years in Kerry. On the 20th of January, 104, this is 1915 now, 104 men marched through Tralee with arms, and 130 marched to Keane and back on the 24th of January, and by the 25th of May, volunteers were active all over the county. Volunteers from Castleisland, Coddens and Fireys, mustered in Fireys, and they were reviewed by Richard Fitzgerald, the captain of the Killarney Volunteers, and of course that's the great Dick Fitzgerald, the Kerry footballer, after whom the Fitzgerald Stadium is named. And he has that story about Jack McKenna and the Listowel races. Sorry, just taking out bits here and there now. At the funeral of Daniel Slattery at Tralee Volunteer, Irish volunteers attended, sounded the last post and fired 3 volleys over his grave from shotguns. There were 18 branches of the volunteers in Kerry in February 1916. The Newtown Sands branch had been disbanded. It had been broken up by the parish priest, so it wasn't Father Green, I guarantee you. Mr. Cotton was giving instructions in the rifle, and in rifle, sword and bayonet fighting, and in skirmishing. The chairman of the commission, Lord Harding, had he been a soldier? No, he had been in the Labour Exchange in Tralee, and he had lost his job there. But Pádraig Pierce arrived in Tralee. He was a friend of his. He reviewed 248 volunteers in the sports field. Mr. Justice Shearman, is that the Pierce who was executed? Yes, he was twice in Tralee, and so were others of the leaders. For example, James Connolly. Now, he has, I don't know who P.T. Daly was, that might be Ned Daly. Blythe, Ernest Blythe, Desmond Fitzgerald, that's Garrett's father, and O'Reilly. The last 3 were ordered out of Kerry by the military as dangerous. Question, was there any rising in Kerry? There was no actual rising, but 2 constables were shot and wounded in Farnford. That was by Jim Brearden in Farnford. And then he goes on to tell the story about Casement and Bailey and Stack and Concollins. I can give the details of the number of arms the volunteers had. 396 rifles and 273 shotguns. Repeating rifles, Mausers, Mannlichers, if that's right. Mostly ordinary rifles, Schneider rifles, all sorts of mixtures, Rook rifles, an extraordinary selection. There were about 70 shotguns brought to Kerry in 1915. They were an American make with a single barrel for buckshot, and they were made in a special way for fixing bayonets, and that was by the O'Reilly. He actually designed the bayonets for fixing to the shotguns. And I don't know if I said it last night, all that was worrying him was would the tension in the bayonet, when you stick the bayonet to some fella, would the bayonet break, would you be able to pull it out? It's a piece to get about things that happened during the shooting in Tarnford and so on and so forth. Aged 34 years. Has been a member of the Listowel Irish Volunteers and is still a member. His rifle was broken upon the 6th of May before being surrendered. Now that happened in a lot of places. When the thing was over, there was a kind of a negotiation. If the volunteers gave up their arms, that they wouldn't be arrested. And the other side of it was they wouldn't be arrested and maybe shot, which they quite believed that they might be. And of course, as I said the last night, the story was always about Maxwell opening the grave of the 40 of the 80, and that's quite true, because the plans of the grave are over in London and Kew, and it was designed for whatever it was, 40 or 80. Only the Hesco put a stop to him. So people brought in their rifles and they brought them to the barracks, or here in the store, or brought to the square, and a lot of the volunteers, they broke their arms before they gave them up, so that, I suppose, as a kind of a, what shall I say, a sign or a symbol or whatever. Pádraig Stack, national teacher, Dwa, Kilmorna, County Kerry, aged 30 years. He resides with his brother, who was a very advanced Sinn Féiner. Pádraig Stack writes seditious literature in his house for young men who assemble there. Pádraig Stack was warned by the Board of National Education because about a month ago the assembly of men in the house ceased, and the Sinn Féin the Dwa Sinn Féin band instruments which were stored in the house were removed. This shows P. Stack's former connection with the Sinn Féin volunteers. Robert Quill, Talbot, 30 years of age, national teacher. There is no evidence that he is a Sinn Féiner, but he is generally believed to be a Sinn Féiner. Patrick Callahan, Kilquan National School, Ballydavid, Dingle, 30 years old, assistant national teacher. The police never saw Callahan do anything except to continually associate with the most dangerous Sinn Féiners in Dingle, including Michael and James Moriarty, and that's the famous Michael Moriarty. He ended up as a captain in the National Army, the police army. Diarmaid Corkery was an Irish teacher. John Malone, I don't know John Malone. Both before and during the recent rebellion, Callahan's father's public house was visited by Corkery, and he was continually closeted with the assistant national school teacher. And there must be people here that would remember or often heard of Pádraig Callahan, because he was the principal for many, many years in Knockenour School. And his son was Tony Callahan, God rest him, teacher here in Skullgrave and the Magna and the great Coppersmith. So now he was knocked out. Pádraig was knocked out from an early age. Edward Keane, Yamanakahan, St. Brenda's National School, Ballyveen, Ballydavid, Dingle. His brother Morris was a prominent Sinn Féiner. He is of a milder type. The police never saw him do anything objectionable, but he continually associated with all the Sinn Féiners mentioned above. Complaints are made by loyal subjects about this man instilling disloyal ideas against the government into the minds of his children. He taught with Fiona and Lynch for some years in Dublin. And good Irish woman, Bridget Ferreter, Bentry National School, Dingle, about 30 years of age, national school teacher. She is a strong Sinn Féiner and a cousin of the Moriartys. She was a member of Cumann in Dingle, and she was warned by Keane O'Leary that she must give it up under pain of dismissal from her job. Charles O'Leary, Gné Gwille Ramore, would that be Cormac's father, I wonder, 27 years old, principal teacher, reputed strong Sinn Féiner, but there are no volunteers in his locality. If there were, there would be no doubt he would be a leader. William Scully, Shannon Cashel, Glencar, 27 years old, assistant national teacher.